Today, you will see really interesting and complex explicable structures. This is a real alien civilization, the existence of which is hushed up by the authorities. You can explore the buried cities of India or Egypt. Explore the strange arsenals of New York. But you don't have to go that far. After all, there is a huge city very close by, in which real antediluvian buildings are still preserved. And these are not just ordinary houses and temples. These are technological structures, forgotten civilizations. And we don't know anything about this civilization at all. Historians don't tell us anything about this world at all. Not only do they not tell, but they also participate in the destruction of artifacts. They also compose various funny stories about the recent past. That's what they came up with about Kiev. The exact date of the foundation of the city has not been established. The first Slavic settlement in these places appeared in the 7th century. In the year 882, Kiev became the capital of Russia, and by the 12th century, had reached its heyday. Then, as a result of the Mongol invasion, the city was destroyed and fell into decay. A wonderful story is taught to us in schools, but all the facts of this story, to put it mildly, are sucked out of the finger. Let's take this as an example of the most famous monument of Kievan Rus, the Golden Gate. The Golden Gate is a landmark with a centuries-old history. They are not only a symbol of modern Kiev, they symbolize the authenticity of evidence of the existence of Kievan Rus and princes. The Golden Gate was built under the famous Prince Yaroslav the Wise. The gates are constructed from the outdoor open side of the city. Here, the natural relief did not protect the ancient capital, so high ramparts were piled on this side, on top of which wooden walls were built. The entrance to the city was also made from this side of the highest fortifications, so that guests of the city could be convinced of its greatness and inaccessibility. The view of these gates, firstly, is impressive, and secondly, it is puzzling. Judging by the design, our ancestors loved eclecticism very much. For some reason, they used building materials of different eras in the defensive structure. If the main part of the Golden Gate is built of stone and red brick, then why are the walls that adjoin the gate completely wooden? Or, under Yaroslav, bricks were outlandish and only front entrances were built from them. All right, let the wooden walls pass over the balls. But all this does not correspond to reality. The modern form of the Golden Gate is just a fantasy project of historians. Not even a project, but a protective sarcophagus that protects ancient ruins of unknown purpose from the environment. Why did historians call these unsightly ruins by such a big name, the Golden Gate? According to the chronicle of monk Nestor, in the tale of bygone years, the Golden Gate in Kiev appeared in the time of Yaroslav Vladimirovich. Saint Hilarion also mentions the Great Kiev Gate. In general, on the basis of two very controversial sources, historians have decided that a huge Golden Gate was built in Kiev. Although not the exact place, the spelling has not been preserved. Then, historians continue to create an illusory reality. That's what they say. For 2 centuries, the Golden Gate has remained one of the main symbols of Kiev. Its inaccessibility is a pledge. No wonder, cutting through the Golden Gate meant taking the city by storm. Kiev fell only in 1240th year. Bachu Khan, together with his horde, approached the city and besieged it. The assault through the Golden Gate failed. Then the Tatars broke in through the less fortified Lyat Gate. After that, they burned and looted the whole city, and of course, did not forget about the Golden Gate. From the fantasies of historians, it can be concluded that the Golden Gate was destroyed in the 13th century. New information about them appears only in the 15th century. Travelers reported that the Golden Gate is functioning, at one of the entrances to Kiev, and its guards are guarding them. The first image of the ruins of the Golden Gate appeared only in the 17th century. They were depicted by the Dutch artist M. Boom van Lusterfield. According to Westerfield's drawing, it is impossible to understand the purpose of these ruins. Historians say that this is the gate, but I see the ruins of an old temple. There are no shafts visible either on the right or on the left, or maybe the Tatars not only burned the brick gates, but also, just in case, manually demolished all the ramparts. Then the history of the Golden Gate moves from the realm of speculation to the realm of historical insanity. In the middle of the 17th century, the Golden Gate was almost completely destroyed, but despite everything, it retained its symbolic function, the main front entrance. In 1648 year, it was at the Golden Gate that crowds of Kievans met Bogdan Khmelnytsky with an army. The ruins retained their ceremonial function until the 18th century. Then the famous ruins disappeared. The story of the disappearance of the Golden Gate should take the honorable first place in the category of incoherent historical nonsense. That's what was happening. By the middle of the 18th century, the condition of the Golden Gate was recognized as very critical. There was a question of repair. Colonel de Basket, an engineer, was appointed to inspect the structure and take measures to preserve it. De Basket examined the gate and suggested not to repair the gate, but to partially disassemble it and hide it in an earthen rampart. Just brilliant. Look at the height of the earthen rampart. It turns out that in order to save a unique architectural monument, it must be disassembled on a brick and put it all in an earthen, not very high shaft. In 1755 year, the ruins of the Golden Gate were covered with earth. We look at the drawing of Westerfeld and understand that in order to hide such a structure in the center of Kiev, it must be completely dismantled, or a high hill must be poured on this place. The subsequent history of the Golden Gate is not disappointed with its delirium. Just imagine, there are gates on the busy Kiev road, which has been used since the 10th century. The road was actively used up to the 17th century. Crowds of Kievans in 1648 year welcomed Bogdan Khmelnytsky here. Let's remember that it was a busy highway until 1799 year. The old gate was filled with earth in 1755 year. For the passage of people, a new gate was built nearby, which lasted until 1799 year. Then, a very strange event happens. According to historians, all residents of Kiev have a bad memory. How can we explain in another way that a busy road passes through the city, goods have been transported for more than 500 years? In 1755 year, the old gates were filled in, new ones were opened nearby. The new gate lasted until 1799 year, but then, we get a historical gap. No one explains what happened next. Why the busiest highway was not just closed, it disappeared from the memory of all residents of Kiev. In 1799 year, there was still a road, and only 33 years later, the Golden Gate had to look for an archaeologist. For 33 years, even the exact mention of the location of the gate has disappeared. In 1832 year, amateur archaeologist Konrad Lochwitsky undertook to find the Golden Gate at his own expense. Soon he found the ruins. They had neither vaults nor the remains of the gate church. They looked very sad. How was it possible to lose the main gate of the city at all? Only 30 years have passed, and we have completely forgotten the location of the gate. I agree, such a situation could have arisen if no one lived in Kiev, and it stood empty until the beginning of the 19th century. Then people came and began to populate the city, simultaneously digging up various ruins. But, at the end of the 18th century, ordinary life was lived in Kiev, and the city was inhabited. So why does no one remember where the main gate of the city is? After all, In 1755 year, by the decision of a special commission, the gates were buried. Was the gate buried and not marked anywhere on the plans? Even if you look at the photo of the newly opened gate, the height of the ruins is about 8 meters. So, there was a huge shaft passing through here, in which the ruins were hidden, but there are no traces of the shaft. And now the main historical mystery. There was a busy trade route through the Golden Gate, and it lasted for several centuries. In 1755 year, the gates were filled in, others were built nearby. So, the road functioned until the beginning of the 19th century. And now we have the main historical question of what happened to the main road of Kiev, which passed through the Golden Gate. This road just disappeared. The main road of Kiev disappeared in 1799 year, since before that year, the spare Golden Gate functioned. Then the gate was lost, and archaeologists had to look for it. The easiest way to find the city gates is simply to approach them along the road that passes through them. But the gate is lost, the road has also disappeared. And these are not some dark times, this is quite recently, the beginning of the 19th century. The gates were falling asleep, and what happens, the main road was also filled in. But this is not some secondary street. Bogdan Khmelnytsky's troops entered the city along this street. Then the embassy of the Russian Tsar was greeted on the occasion of the annexation of Ukraine and Russia. It was a very important, historically significant road. Then something happens, they forget about this road, they don't know where it passed. But this is not a road in an open field that can be forgotten in 30 years. The road that has been passing through the city for centuries is always completely built up with historical buildings along its roadsides. This is how the Golden Gate looks from above now. It doesn't look like an important historical highway passed through them. The gate is in some kind of cul-de-sac. But if you believe the historians, up to 1799 year, it was the main highway of Kiev, which was simply lost in 1830s, along with the Golden Gate. But the Golden Gate is not the main topic. I showed them just as an example. How to make a monument of historical culture out of two unknown purpose walls. Kiev is actually a unique city. And it was in Kiev back in the 1940s that very strange historical structures were preserved. Kiev can be called a champion in terms of the number of preserved star fortresses. And these are not just small bastions. These stars are the largest in Europe. Let's start with the largest star, the old Pokora Fortress. It's just a giant structure, and the place of honor on this star is occupied by a huge building called the Arsenal. It's a strange coincidence, but the Moscow Kremlin also has a huge arsenal. From the imagination of historians, you can learn that the history of the Kiev fortress dates back to the depths of the 12th century. It was then that the first fortification walls of the Kiev Pokora monastery appeared. Then these walls were destroyed by the Mongol Tatars, then the walls were rebuilt again. In 1679 year, the Ukrainian hetman Ivan Samoilovich strengthened the ramparts of Kiev Pokora Lavra, dug a moat. Then, the work continued under Peter the Great during the preparation for the Northern War. The work was completed in 1723 year. Peter the Great was just an indefatigable man. At the beginning of the 18th century, he built bastions all over the country. In Moscow, there are earthen ramparts that look like stone in the paintings. There are earthen and stone ramparts in Kiev. In Kiev, they built not just an earthen fortress. There are kilometers of tunnels and underground floors under this fortress. Historians say that Peter the Great has nothing to do with tunnels. These are all monks. They had nothing to do, so they dug kilometer-long passages underground, which may have passed under the deeper riverbed. Here's a look at the plans of the near and far caves. All this was dug by monks. Quite by chance, the largest star fortress in Europe was built around these caves. And if you pay attention to the remains of the fortress at the bottom of the deeper, then the underground passage from the Lavra, under the deeper, no longer seems surprising. Also, the staff of the Pokora Fortress Museum does not deny that there is a huge network of tunnels under Kiev. The height and width of some tunnels are such that they can be moved by horse-drawn wagons. The tunnels are dry. Ancient masonry has been preserved almost everywhere. While we leave the Staropetrovsk fortress, let's look at the following interesting photo. Look at the two huge square fields. It seems that these are photographs of 1918. These two squares are very reminiscent of old engravings of New York. In New York, the Croton Reservoir. But what kind of huge rectangular fields near Kiev in 1918th year? We need to figure it out. If anyone knows what it is, write in the comments. The next interesting object is the Arsenal factory. According to historians, it was founded in the 18th century. Here's a look at the unusual design of the buildings of this plant. As if there is a star fortress under it. These curves are still visible today. It's a very strange building, and its basements are appropriate, old arched vaults. It seems very likely that earlier the dungeons of the plant and the Kiev Pokora Lavra were combined into a single mysterious complex. The next object is now called the oblique caponier. Here is an interesting photograph of the beginning of the 20th century. Strange square fields are visible in the distance, and in the near term, the walls of an oblique caponier. It is very clearly visible that these are high stone walls. The oblique caponier was allegedly built in 1844th year. In the early 1860s, the caponier was turned into a political prison. And this is not all the stars of Kiev. There are really fantastic ones. Near the Zverenitskaya fortress, which is unique in itself, and has very interesting underground structures, there is such an object. I think this is an extremely interesting structure. Now it is impossible to see it in modern photographs, but it has been preserved in old aerial photography. I don't know about you, but for me, this structure evokes comparison with some kind of technical structure on another planet. Like stills from a science fiction movie. A starship is about to land nearby. It doesn't look like a photograph from the 1940s at all. I found information about this place. Historians, of course, have prepared a version for this object. But I will tell you about this in the second part. I will also tell you about the rest of the star fortresses of Kiev and find out in what year they began to destroy their unique stuffing. That's it. Watch my channel.